Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
This week we'll be talking about our coverage of the Epstein birthday book, the new entry into the Texas Senate race, and the GOP's shrinking majority in the House. After that, we'll have an interview with Congresswoman Yassamin Ansari, and we'll answer all of your questions about our life on the Hill.
Hi everyone, we are so excited to be back and chatting today. There is so much that was going on last week, which I feel like we say that every episode, and it will never stop being true, I think, especially with this Congress and the House especially. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things that happened last week, and I feel like you would agree with me, is still, once again, the Epstein files, which, if you remember from previous episodes, we had said that the Epstein files is one of those things that we hear from people all the time. Like, it's the biggest thing that I think people who are not Hill aficionados they want to know about. And so I think the fact that we are now, once again, that's kind of leading off the show just kind of shows how important it is to people. And so I think the biggest thing was the birthday book. I think that was, and also what the heck is the birthday book? I didn't know about it really until last week. So why don't you share with the audience what the birthday book is?
So it dropped last Monday, and it is essentially like a little bit over 200 pages of compiled letters, poems, whatever you want to call them, pictures that Ghislaine Maxwell compiled from his friends, his family members, his nieces, his nephews, to Jeffrey Epstein. So that dropped from House Oversight last week, and I was sifting through it at 9 p.m. And honestly, it kind of just made me sick to my stomach. It's exactly what you would expect to be in the book. Like, the pages and the notes from his friends are absolutely disgusting to read.
Like gaudy and gross.
And so that is just, I feel like I've become kind of an Jeffrey Epstein file expert in recent weeks, just covering it so closely since I do a lot of House Oversight. But I think that the two most notable things that I wrote about were obviously the letter that President Donald Trump has in there that he has since denied and has denied since a few months ago. Wall Street Journal put out
a little bit of a messaging problem on their end, I would think.
Yes. The Wall Street Journal put out that this letter existed. They didn't put a photo of the letter, but they essentially described it in very close detail to what it ended up being whenever the House Oversight received it from the Epstein estate. The birthday book came in a slew of documents that the Epstein estate had given from a subpoena from House Oversight. So House Oversight looked over the documents where House Oversight Democrats released the one specific birthday card from President Trump early, which caused some problems there because it was released early. But it essentially has President Trump's signature, and the White House has been denying it since it happened.
There's been a little bit of some miscommunication there, I think, from the White House, because for a while they said that it didn't exist at all, and so then they were suing the Wall Street Journal for defamation. And then when it did come out, they said that is a false letter and it doesn't exist. And then it was obviously right there, so that was a little bit harder for them, I think, to combat. And then people have zeroed in on the signature. Which looks, I think, neither of us are signature experts, but I think on a regular eye, it looks very similar to the signatures that we've seen on letters to members or letters to companies or things like that, especially since Trump has returned to the White House. And so I think being able to refute that signature is his is going to be an uphill battle. I think what's interesting about the birthday book is that the people who are in it were clearly connected to Epstein's world. And one of the things that we don't know, a lot of people don't know, is were they instigators? Were they enablers? Were they just completely kept in the dark? And so I think that's one of the things that people are focusing on, especially with President Trump, is, did he know about Jeffrey Epstein's antics? Was he part of them? Was he enabling them? Or was he in the wrong place at the wrong time? And I think Democrats are more leaning towards thinking that they want to see some hard evidence that he wasn't just kept in the dark. They want to make sure that it's 100% accurate, that he had no part in this. But I think Republicans are saying, we're taking President Trump at his word. He says the letter's not his. He says the signature is forged. We're going to just try to find justice for the victims. And that is a great sentiment to have, but I think a lot of people, especially in the public, want to know, what did Trump know?
We've kind of watched House Republicans fall in line with the White House's messaging. House Oversight Chairman James Comer did say that he's taking Trump at his word, and if he says he didn't sign the birthday letter, that he didn't sign the birthday letter, and that's coming from the person leading this investigation. So I do think that House Republicans are falling in line with the White House's messaging on this letter. So I guess from here we'll just see what happens with the Wall Street Journal lawsuit and what happens from there. But I do think that that was one of the main points. And then obviously President Bill Clinton has also had photos and been seen with Jeffrey Epstein and has been reported flying on his plane. And he did write also a letter. There was not photos of him or necessarily other letters like Trump's was more visual, but his described Epstein's childlike, essentially like curiosity, personality. So that was interesting. It
kind of like gives you shivers a little bit.
Yeah.
You're just like you're not quite sure how something like this seems like movie-esque. You're not. How did this become part of like our regular American political landscape? It's just kind of interesting.
And those were definitely the two most notable things in the book. There was also an address book that was released through House Oversight that has been released to the public before that has more names that we know. Andrew Cuomo. It has some relatives to Governor J.B. Pritzker, like just people like that kind of stood out to me. But that, again, is just an address book. That doesn't necessarily show any wrongdoings or connections to Epstein. But it is still public names that we're seeing in like somewhat of Epstein's orbit, which can harm a reputation.
And I think it's interesting too because that kind of leads into this fight right now Republicans are having versus like Massey, who wants the discharge petition, who he wants the files to be released in its entirety. Just dump it to the public, let the public make their own assumptions. And a lot of Republicans have made this argument, including James Comer on Oversight, and other Republicans have said, well, we need to not only protect the names of the victims, but also, releasing things like the address book, like you said, is not totally indicative of wrongdoing. And so the public does have to make their own decisions, really, about what they feel about it. Obviously, there's been, a court case against Epstein. Those files are still kind of under lock and key. The Attorney General's trying to get them. So I think right now the transparency is the biggest argument in how to do that. And I think that with this discharge petition in the House, and now there's moves in the Senate, isn't there, to get the files out? Talk a little bit about what's going on.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer filed an amendment to the NDAA, which is a defense bill, to essentially force the Senate to vote on this amendment on a bill that is going to pass regardless. It has passed for multiple decades now, and it requires the Senate to vote on essentially identical legislation to Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna's legislation in the House, because regardless of if their legislation passes the House whenever the discharge petition hits 218, if it does, it still hits a roadblock whenever it gets to the Senate. If it's scheduled for a vote, if it passes, this amendment on the defense bill does force a vote on essentially the identical legislation, making senators go on record voting for it.
Right. So it's the same kind of problem that the House is having. And I think the senators, especially Republican senators, they aren't as firebrandy or as aggressively conservative as I think members in the House are. But kind of like we said, a lot of Republicans have fallen behind Trump on this issue. And I think that while the House has been a little bit more abrasive when it comes to saying, nah, we don't care about the files, I think in the Senate you're going to find it to be a lot more civilized and a lot more discussion about it amongst the conference. But again, that 60 vote filibuster threshold, that is going to be difficult because you'll certainly get Democrats voting on that amendment. I don't know if you're going to get a ton of Republican senators on it as well. So it could be just kind of a throwaway vote.
I mean, again, it's a tough vote.
It's a tough vote to take.
The entire GOP and Democratic caucus in the Senate are voting on paper that will show up in congressional records forever.
It might be the one vote that people in America are actually paying, like actually turning on to C-SPAN and watching this vote.
Totally. But that does lead me into where the same bill is in the House. It is at like around 216 signatures, 217, given the shrinking majority in the House. If you want to talk a little bit about GOP's shrinking, already razor-thin majority. Yeah,
so basically what happened last week is that James Walkinshaw, he is a Democrat. He ended up replacing Jerry Connolly, and that is for Virginia's 11th district. And so Connolly died earlier this year. The special election is kind of the first for Democrats because in Florida, Republicans have already won two special elections for congressional seats. So Republicans kind of had the edge there. And so now this is Democrats first, and so he has been sworn into the House, and so he is now a member of the body. And with his signature on the discharge petition, now they only need one more. And it's something that what we are seeing and what we've talked about to Congressman Massey and Congressman Khanna is that they are not really respecting that much more of a Republican push behind to get the files. The signatures they already have, that's going to be probably about it for now, maybe give or take. But right now they only need one more. And so with these special elections, that's really kind of driving a knife into the side of Speaker Johnson because, before Walkinshaw's win, he only had a 3-seat margin. And that meant you could lose 3 seats and still pass legislation along party lines. And that's something that Johnson has really tried to do a lot since he's become Speaker, is pass bills with just Republican support. And that kind of dates back to kind of like a taboo from when Speaker McCarthy was making deals with Democrats. And that caused his ouster. And so I think that is what is very kind of hovering over Johnson's head right now, is that he really wants to pass these bills with only Republican support. And so with Walkinshaw joining the Democratic conference, now that majority is at 2. But there are other elections coming up, though. There is one at the end of September to fill Raul Grijalva's seat in Arizona, and his daughter is in a pretty prime place to win that seat. It's a pretty blue district. I don't think Democrats will have any problem holding on to it. So when that happens, that will not shrink the majority just because of the way that the House is structured and numbers. It will still be a 2-seat margin. However, it will give Democrats another signature for that discharge petition. And that election is on September 23rd.
And her team did confirm to us that she would sign the petition her first day in Congress. So as soon as she's sworn in, that discharge petition hits 218. And then essentially is what it looks like. And that's what Congressman Massey
That's what they predicted.
That's what Congressman Massey was telling me, that they knew that all along. The White House knew that all along. Speaker Johnson knew that all along. That they really only needed 4 Republicans. Whenever we were first reporting on it, I remember we were like, who are these 6 Republicans going to be? But little did we know that all of them all along knew that they only needed those original 4.
They planned it well. It kind of shows that there's a lot behind the scenes that's happening, especially when you do these discharge petitions. It's a cat and mouse game you have to play. And we've seen Speaker Johnson rage against discharge petitions. We've talked about that. And so I think the fact that this will hit 218 with majority Democratic support will give Johnson a messaging edge. He will say, this is a Democratic scheme pushed by a couple Republicans. But at the end of the day, 4 of your conference, Speaker Johnson, 4 of your conference did sign it. And so it's something that's happening. It's a process, and it's going to be on the floor, clearly, one way or the other.
And I mean, when it does hit the floor, I would not be surprised to see more Republican support than we have on the discharge petition. I think that the discharge petition, when you do sign it, it is typically a tool used by the minority in the House. And so kind of signing on from the majority is kind of like a middle finger to leadership in a way. I think that these women and Thomas Massie have signed on, they're not necessarily doing it to go against leadership.
Right. Their motives are
different. But it typically, looking at it like that, so I think that a lot of Republicans did shy away from that, but it is less unlikely for them to vote against leadership on the floor than to sign on to a discharge petition.
And especially a lot of them are co-sponsors of the bill. And so I think that we will see, not all of the co-sponsors, because the White House has been whipping against this for quite some time. I think that we will see a couple of the co-sponsors join. And again,
I agree.
With a 2-seat majority, give or take, depending on Democratic attendance, that could, people could be out sick, they could be traveling, it really depends. But with Walkinshaw's in, with Grijalva in, that'll still be a 2-seat margin. And so with already Republicans on the discharge petition pushing over, I think that we could easily see this passing the House. And then there's other special elections that are coming up later this year, one in November and one in December. And so if a Democrat wins the one in November, which is to replace Sylvester Turner in Texas, Johnson's majority will be 1, which is insane because you think of the big, beautiful bill and you think of other legislation where 3 people defected, 2 people defected, to have one Republican as your only margin when you have at least 25 who never agree with you, that's going to be so incredibly difficult, especially for future legislation, like future government funding bills, like other contentious legislation potentially for reconciliation again, which would be a horror show for everyone involved. But I think that will be just such a nightmare for Johnson. But if Republicans are able to hold on to Mark Green's seat in Tennessee in December, it'll bump it back up to 2. So with the way that the map is laid now, it's likely come 2026 January, there will be a 2-seat margin in the House with all of these seats filled. And so then Johnson is going into an election year with 2 seats,
Yeah.
especially when you're now having to really ramp up messaging on your legislation to prove that you deserve to keep the majority for the remaining 2 years of Trump's term.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of why the House is going to be in a bit of a tizzy for when it comes to elections.
Totally.
But also in the Senate, there are a lot of races that are heating up too that I think a lot that are getting kind of pushed away to the wayside because the House is just louder and crazier. But the biggest one I think that's kind of taking shape and has been taking shape for some time is Texas, because now there's a prominent Democrat in the race.
Totally. Which is crazy to say that. I don't necessarily want to say that Texas is in play with the swing states that are in 2026, like North Carolina or Maine or Michigan. It's not, I wouldn't say it's up to par on those, but I do think that it's going to shape out to be
a closer race than we've probably seen in a while.
And if not the most, close to the most expensive race, including primaries in the Senate, that they're going to see. We're going to see a super contentious, both Republican and Democratic primary. We saw Democratic Texas House State Rep James Tallarico jump in the race last week, which was huge. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple months back, and Rogan expressed nothing but
praise.
Great word. I couldn't think of the word. But praise for Tallarico.
You don't think of praise and Joe Rogan and Democrats going together very much.
Totally.
But in this case, it was able to do that.
He essentially, summing it up, said that if Tallarico were to run for higher office, he would fully support him. And
is kind of
candidates
nice.
like him were people that we needed to run. Tallarico used to be a school teacher. He represents kind of an area outside of Austin. Shout out Austin, I used to live there. But I think that he is such an interesting candidate because he is an incredible messenger.
He's one of the top for Texas Democrats for sure, but maybe even for the party right now.
Totally. And I think he has the potential to be a very similar candidate to Beto O'Rourke when reaching voters. I think that he has that talent for messaging that a lot of Democrats in Texas kind of miss the mark on whenever trying to reach the people in Texas.
Yeah.
He came, Beto in 2018 against Cruz came within margin of error of Cruz, which for a state that necessarily shouldn't be in play is
It was pretty shocking back then, especially because, the state is, for better or worse, it's mostly red. It's likely Republican in a lot of nonpartisan rating outlets. And I think that, especially now with redistricting having happened, the state's even shifting more red. So, but also the thing about the Senate is that redistricting doesn't necessarily affect them because it's just you're representing the whole state, so you have to worry about your specific district. So I think that may also potentially fire up Democrats even more because they're so mad about redistricting, they might just boost the crap out of Tallarico.
So there are caveats, though. There's
always a caveat. There's always caveats.
There is a super competitive Republican primary between incumbent Senator John Cornyn and then Attorney General Ken Paxton. They are going to have an incredibly messy race, an incredibly
it's going to be dirty.
Expensive
It's going to be
race.
One of those mudslinging races that are just, everyone's going to have a target on their back.
And in general, if Cornyn were to come out on top from the primary, I think that any Democrat is going to have a harder time because he is more moderate. He doesn't have as many scandals attached to his name.
Right.
I think that
incumbency is also a big help.
Yes.
A lot of people just see the Senate incumbent and they'll just go, yep, check.
Totally. Whereas Ken Paxton, he may be great in a primary because Republican voters in Texas do like him. They love how Trumpy he is. They love how conservative he is. But he is pretty scandal-ridden.
Yeah.
So outside of a primary, he may not attract those middle voters like Cornyn does. So that, first of all, the Republican primary deeply is going to affect the general primary, especially with the money.
And because you could see Republican voters who they're like, well, I don't really want to vote for or they'll go to vote and they'll vote for Cornyn, but Paxton will win. And they'll go, I don't really want him. And Tallarico seems to be pretty moderate for a Democrat. I'll either just sit this one out or I'll just vote for him.
Exactly.
And you could see some cross-party voting, which would be kind of insane for Texas. But again, I think it kind of shows just how crazy it gets when both parties have shifted so partisan.
Totally.
That people who are moderate, you could be seeing just crossovers from all over.
Yeah, completely. I think that there's just so many areas of obstacles for each candidate in this race, Republican, Democrat. But I do think that the second obstacle that Tallarico has is there is a major Democratic candidate that he will be running against in a primary, and that's Colin Allred. He was the Senate Democratic candidate for last year against Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
He fell short pretty deeply comparatively to the 2018 race that Beto ran against Cruz. He really campaigned in cities, whereas Beto traveled all around the state. They campaigned completely differently. But the problem with this is with two large Democratic candidates, they're going to spend a lot of money in a primary that will be needed in a general against Cornyn or Paxton.
And that money funneling will be different compared on who it is, because if you're going after Paxton, you're going after, it's going to be dirty. You're going after his scandals. You're going after his divorce. You're going after, whatever. Against Cornyn, you're going to try to connect him to Trump. But even though he has come kind of outspoken against Trump at times, like it's definitely, your money will be spent in very different ways.
Totally. And so I think that it does put him down cash in the general if he were to win the primary against Allred. And then you also have the caveat on a Cornyn primary or a Cornyn general will be harder than a Paxton general.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of caveats, but he is a really interesting candidate to follow. Obama has shown interest in him. He had a meeting with Obama, and I think that that's massive coming from a
state lawmaker.
Also a former dark horse candidate to a presidency.
Yeah.
People really like Tallarico, and so I think that he'll be someone really big to watch in the next 2 years and maybe the next decade.
And a lot of people, I think, might be wondering while they're listening to us just yap about this is like, why should we care about the Texas race and why should we care? And I think that there's a lot of different reasons. One, kind of like what we said, it's a state that now is kind of in play that hasn't been for quite some time, maybe since 2018. And I think the fact that these states that are mostly red or mostly blue, I think it shows that no matter what, like, voter participation frickin' matters.
Yeah.
Because when and redistricting also in the House, like, that's going to be major too, especially for these, Democrats who are now in more red seats and Republicans if California gets its way who are in more blue areas. I think that voter participation is going to matter, and it always does for like presidentials, especially in the last couple cycles. It comes down to every vote to see who wins. I think that the Senate races this year, while the House is a bit more flashy and there's going to be, all of them are up. The House is up every 2 years, so it's constantly a revolving door of people.
Yeah.
I think that while a lot of attention will be focused on, is the House going to flip blue? Is it going to stay red? I think that people should not discount the Senate, because then there's going to be a whole swath of senators coming up in 2028. And then, when that's a presidential year, that's going to be major. And so I think that these 2026 elections are going to be very indicative of what we're going to see in 2028.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about Texas all day long in the political realm, but I think that that's enough of us yapping about it for this episode.
We'll come back to another one.
We'll come back to it.
Yes.
But up next, we have our interview with Congresswoman Yassamin Ansari. So we are here today with Congresswoman Ansari. Thanks for coming on our show today with Capital Conversations.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
So obviously there has been lots of news last week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I saw a tweet you quote tweeted, and it was from some students that a Republican and a Democratic group on campus came together and did a joint post in their response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And you quoted it and said that we need to see a lot of it more of what they did there. I think that was a really big response from kids. I mean, college kids. What were your thoughts on that? And whenever you saw that post, what kind of emotions went through your head, and what have you seen?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. I think anytime, well, first of all, taking a step back, we've had so much political violence in recent months, recent years, political violence, gun violence. There's obviously, I think, are at an extreme height when it comes to partisanship in this country, and like have lost the ability to have conversations and resolve our differences with diplomacy and conversations and engagement. And I've seen that in Congress as well. Like, I'm, obviously a freshman member here, but in the first 8-9 months, I think it's been very difficult to engage with colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But even around things that shouldn't be I understand we have very different views on many, many things, but certain things such as being against political violence and any shape that it takes should be pretty straightforward, I believe. Um, but that, we haven't seen that from Congress, right? So I thought it was really, really encouraging that these, college students from the Young Democrats and the Young Republicans, decided to put out a statement together. I think it's also meaningful that it was the college organizations doing so because so much of the violence that we do see, obviously this murder took place in Utah on a college campus. Then we, same time had another school shooting yesterday in Colorado at a high school. We have school shootings every other week in this country. So I think the more that we can see young people too, take us out of this and talk about the importance of like just being so vehemently against violence is going to be really, really, really important. And I hope we can see it from Congress as well, because it's actually our jobs. We are supposed to be the ones to dial it down. And I think in a moment like this, it's so important to bring the temperature down. Because I mean, I can tell you firsthand, like any colleagues I've talked to since yesterday, we are distraught that this happened, obviously heartbroken for Charlie Kirk's family, but also really scared and terrified about what this implies moving forward. Because I think, violence perpetuates violence. And unless we are the ones to lead and dial it down and change not just our rhetoric, but our actions, then where does that leave us?
Yeah.
And
How
I
do
think that's
you,
really interesting because we kind of, like you said, we've seen a lot of this over the last couple months, years, and I feel like it's kind of a cyclical thing. Like a shooting happens, a horrific event happens, and then we have members of Congress, we have young people, we have, influencers saying, we need to turn the temperature down, we need to turn the rhetoric off, we need to come together. And it seems like it works for like a week, and then it's like a magnet, and then it just bounces back. So
Yeah.
in your experience, as someone who is a freshman member and who is able to reach kind of that younger generation, what do you think needs to be done to turn the temperature down? Because people say that phrase a lot, but they don't either follow through, they don't even know what that means. What do you think are some specific things that maybe younger people, members of Congress in general, need to do now to really make sure that this never happens again?
Well, first of all, I feel that we can't pick and choose when we're outraged about
Mhm.
violence. So if there is, you guys remember a couple months ago, these two Minnesota lawmakers were shot in their homes. I mean, this woman was assassinated at her doorstep. Um, I don't feel, and perhaps this is my personal view, but I don't feel that there was enough condemnation of that from the right.
Mm.
Um, Now you have this horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk. Like, at least from what I've seen, there's been pretty widespread condemnation. Like, I think it's important that no matter if the person killed or affected by the violence is a Republican or a Democrat or whoever, everyone needs to condemn it.
Mhm.
Like, we can't pick and choose based on. So that's one clear one that I don't feel like has been happening in a way that it should be happening. Um, Maybe it's about, and I'm kind of thinking through this because I don't think I have it figured out, but in terms of like what you're asking, I think we have to really, really maybe be more clear when we speak that, you know, let's say I'm talking and I'm saying like I think that, Donald Trump's tactics are authoritarian and he's doing XYZ. Like maybe it's about adding like an emphasis still even with that of like, you know, but we need to solve this through A, B, C, D, and they're like
Mhm.
policy
Yeah.
related or,
Yeah.
peaceful protest related, or like I think making sure you're clear about what the tactics need to be, even if
Mhm.
you disagree with somebody's viewpoints. But that needs to happen across the board. Like I think I find this language that now Fox News has been putting out since last night, or some of their commentators saying, like, this is a war. Like the language of this is a war is violent. Like it just is. And frankly, I fear for my safety. Most of my colleagues fear for their safety. I mean, there are colleagues who've had such serious death threats that like the person had like a full-fledged plan, and people are in jail who have been caught, like thank God soon enough.
Hmm.
But anytime something like this happens and then it's escalated with language like this is a war, or we need to fight back against this under the guise of this is a war, then you're going to see more violence. This is not going to stop. And that's, I think, what scares me the most, and what, I take very seriously in how we all communicate.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that you made a really good point in talking about. I think that I don't think that anytime soon or like at all is it going to go away that like the right is saying things about the left and the left is
Yeah.
saying things about the right. But like there is a point in that where you can turn down the temperature while saying those things. And I don't think that that's necessarily a point that a lot of people have been talking about when talking about ways to cool the temperature that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and just not using violent rhetoric in it. Like, no,
Mhm.
it's not a war. I mean, it's just that's not language that should be used. That's just the most recent one in my mind. But I think there's just generally a lot of violent language utilized when talking about like political or ideological differences. And I think something that is a newer phenomenon in general is like political ideology has become such a major part of our identities. I think more
Yeah.
so than it used to be. That's grown. Whereas like, I don't know, in the past, I feel like there were other parts of your personality or your beliefs that were
Yeah.
equal, if not bigger parts of
Mhm.
your identity. And now where so many people feel like I'm a Republican or Democrat or
Yeah.
progressive or this or that is like fundamental to who they are. It
Mhm.
has become this much bigger thing.
I think that's true because I feel like prior to the assassination that happened last week, I think what was so interesting to me is I'm seeing all of these videos of debates between past presidents or between past members of Congress, or when Republican speakers of the House are introducing a Democratic president. Like just things like that, when you see just this level of respect that was so
Yeah.
prevalent during
Yeah.
like the 1990s and the
Totally.
early 2000s, like you're seeing and you watch that and you're almost really sad because
No, it makes me sad to watch.
it makes me really sad because it's like we should be like that. And it wasn't so long ago. It's not like you can say, oh, that was 100 years ago. Times have changed. It's like, no, that was literally under Obama.
Yeah.
Under Obama, like
Yeah.
like even people who Republicans have, and they've said this for a while, that Republicans who didn't like Obama's policies liked him as a person. He was a great person. And I think even when in Trump's first administration, when he was still getting stuff under his feet, like even some Democrats were like, we don't really love his style. We don't love his politics, but we enjoy him as a person. Obviously, I think in the last few years that has kind of widened a little bit with just a lot of things going on. But I feel like things like this, like the assassination and the things that happened to the Minnesota lawmakers, it's just really sad to see that like only a decade ago we were in such a different place than where we are now.
100%. I think about that a lot. I've gone back and watched the Obama, Mitt
So
Romney,
many times.
Obama,
Yes.
I mean, it's a completely different. They were one, it was actual debate about policy
Yeah.
differences. They were not that different. I mean, it
Yeah.
was they're debating, should we take this very specific route when it comes to our healthcare system, or this very
Right.
specific.
Totally.
Uh, it wasn't personal attacks either.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
I saw there was a thing where like he was saying like, oh, like we both have great visions for this country. It's just whose vision do you align with? And like people loved that. They responded to that. And I think like we need to get back to that. In my opinion, I think. And I think that's the thing too, is a lot of people are coming back to that they're giving this opinion that it's time to come back more to the middle.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's sad for like our generation too, because
Mhm.
this is all we know. Like whenever we really look at it, like this has been the past decade and like that has been the majority of our adult lives. And so this is
Mhm.
what we know. And I think that I saw like a little snippet of it. I don't know if y'all saw the clip of Obama and Bush messing with each other at this inauguration. And I was,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is what it used to be like. And
Hmm.
there was just like that little snippet that I saw that I was like, I couldn't even imagine like being an adult and engaging in politics in the way that we do and watching it play out like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more there. It's the leaders themselves, but it's also so many organizations and entities that have popped up that I think have really like been driving much more like hateful language, frankly, that didn't necessarily exist then. Like you didn't have organizations that were just fully focused on like talking about like getting tons of young people on campus to like be behind a certain ideology in such an extreme way.
Mhm.
So that's another like I guess we were talking about this yesterday. There's also just so many more people with a mic and a platform now because of social media. And so it's much more diffused. Like you can have an elected leader or someone running for president, let's say in a couple years, try to be a unifying force, but in a way that that would be listened to 10 years ago is like I feel like they have less
Um,
influence now, right? Because then there's like
Mhm.
a bunch of other people with big
Yeah.
platforms who can like sway their people.
And so moving into the election season, obviously there's a couple this fall. There's a lot happening in 2026. You don't really know what's going to be on the voters' top of mind until like a couple months before. And, in 2024, it was the economy. And in 2022 midterms, it was abortion and things like that. My question to you is kind of a two-parter. A, do you think that maybe political violence and gun violence and political, rhetoric is going to carry on long into the midterms, or is it going to be kind of one of those things where it's just like a wave right now and then it crashes and then it comes back up again? And then the second part of that is also, what do you think Democrats need to do to kind of rally together and try to kind of get in front of this issue so they are at the forefront when it comes to the midterms?
It's a great question. I think that I think the issue certainly could, my gut says it won't be at the forefront, but however, I think a smart candidate or leader could bring the issue to the forefront in a way of trying to be like the unifying candidate.
Yeah.
Your point around like, I do think there's a big part of the country that is yearning for and nostalgic for
Hmm.
a simpler time where we could talk to each other. And so if, a candidate emerges who is really kind of saying like we do need to bring the country together, like we are, the way a President Obama would speak, like we are not red states, blue states, we are, the United States. And I don't think like trying to replicate the past is the move, but I do think we need to see a little bit more of like unification around values, around economic aspirations. Like, it doesn't matter what part of the country you live in a city, in rural part of the country, what nationality you want to buy a home. Like, everyone aspires to home ownership and the American dream. So I think like a combination of like strong values of unity and respect and kindness and compassion coupled with like making your like we someone who wants to really present a vision of making life more affordable again, and making people's aspirations seem possible. I think a lot of people feel very hopeless um, about the future, especially economically, and with young people in particular. I also think like AI is going to be a huge, huge part of the next election. um, we recently had a bipartisan freshman breakfast with Sam Altman.
Mm.
I, it was really, I learned a lot.
Mm.
And people had different like stances in the room, but I think the truth of the matter is like AI is not going anywhere and it's accelerating so rapidly. And he made very clear that over the next 15 months, they expect such rapid like acceleration of how smart and like really quite superhuman AI will become. And you're already today in 2025 seeing like grads coming out of Stanford and Princeton and like some of the top universities in computer science, and they can't find jobs because of AI. And so the way that's going to evolve over the next 15 months, according to Sam Altman, like we're going to need candidates who can present like a real vision around like, okay, well, now what? Like, how are we going to
Right.
protect, certain jobs? How are we going to make sure people are still fulfilled? How are like, what is the next generation going to do if AI is taking over so many of our typical professions? You even had, Bill Gates saying just the other day that within 10 years, like doctors and teachers won't be around anymore in the same way. So I think like a really, smart, savvy candidate should really have a policy and a vision there as well, because that's going to affect jobs, whether it's manufacturing jobs, blue collar jobs, like every sector will be impacted by AI.
Yeah, I think that it'll be really interesting, like one, to see people campaign on AI, but then also see, I don't really think that there are necessarily super strict rules surrounding AI in campaigning because it's so new. And
Yeah.
I can't even grasp, I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world, but I cannot grasp how much AI is going to be used by campaigns in the 26 cycle and how I think that it's going to have as big of an effect on like the 26 cycle as social media did in like the 2010s, like how it completely just like shifted the whole way that campaigns are run. Because like you can come up with a campaign on AI now, like that kind
Absolutely.
of stuff is crazy. You can make videos of members running that people are going to see on social media circulating that may not even be them.
Yeah.
And so I think that
It's so
that's
crazy.
something that's going to be, I mean, I don't have an answer or anything to like add to what that is going to change in the 26 cycle, but I have a really big feeling that it's going to drastically change how campaigns are done.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think people are already using it, so consistently for writing and for ideas and for whatever, whatever. So yeah, definitely on like the operation side of a campaign for sure. And then, at the same time, I think if you don't have a real vision around if and how you want to regulate AI, how you're going to make up for the lack of jobs for a whole generation that's growing up right now or coming out
Yeah.
of college, like what's the plan? I think that you're gonna not be very successful by 2028 when you're campaigning.
Mhm.
That's so crazy to think about because I just I think a lot of voters probably are like, AI won't affect me. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Like it's in the early stages. And like I even have kind of thought that way a little
Yeah.
bit until like the last like year or so. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden I'm starting to see AI just becoming a huge part of like journalism and just politics. And it's just very weird to, I think, because like obviously in the 2010s, like I was 10 years old. So I was not as politically savvy as I am now. But like I think kind of like Lauren, what you said, like I think I would have been so shocked about how social media just exploded the political landscape had I been, active then, for
Mhm.
us now to be kind of in the thick of it and watching it. And I feel like as a member of Congress too, that's got to be incredibly weird to kind of just like know where things were before you got to Congress and now seeing where it's going to go.
100%. And I feel the same way about AI. Like, I think really up until like, I would say this year, it still sounded kind of far off
Mhm.
Mhm.
in terms of it being this radical transformation. And
Yeah.
now I think in the last 6 months, it's so utilized by just day to day. And then just seeing the different sectors that it's impacting.
Mhm.
Like to see, like when I was at Stanford 10 years ago, computer science was the most popular degree. Everyone wanted to get it because you were like guaranteed to get an amazing job at
Yeah.
tech companies and you were going to be set. And
Yeah.
now those same grads can't
Crazy.
work because
Hmm.
AI can do the same work as like 10 computer scientists. So like it's not that everyone's job will be gone, but like you won't need as many humans to do the work.
Which is
Um,
so crazy. I'm like, are we in a
It
robot
feels
movie? Like,
yes,
I feel like we're
that's
just,
what I was about to say. It feels so surreal.
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I do have one more campaign question related back to political violence. I've heard a lot of members express fear in hosting events now outside today. Like whenever we've looked at events that assassinations or attempts or assassinations have happened, we had Charlie Kirk and then we had Trump last year. I think that obviously that does invoke a lot of fear. I think that there are a lot of political events that have taken place outside. Do you foresee that changing in the 2026 landscape with political violence being so prevalent?
Oof. I mean, man, I hope not because it's so important.
Totally.
But people are scared for sure.
I think so.
Um, we've been really trying, like the Democratic caucus and our leadership has been trying to negotiate with the Republican leadership around like additional budget for
Mhm.
security. I think we're just thinking a lot more proactively about how to keep our events secure. And obviously, nothing that you do will fully protect you
Yeah.
in this kind of environment. But for example, like, and Speaker Johnson did on a trial basis provide a little bit more budget in August.
Mhm.
And so, for example, like when I hosted town halls in August, for the first time, we had people go through a wand and like metal detectors to make sure they weren't
Right.
weapons. I had a little bit more security getting in and out. And it feels weird, I mean, honestly, because it's new. But I do think it's really important. I think for a long time I felt like it was overkill, and now I very much don't think anything that we could do would be overkill.
Mhm.
And I think it would be irresponsible not to do it. So even thinking about my team, like in our district office, especially, uh, where it's just like a normal office building. You're not, you're at the Capitol. It's just somewhere we've rented, thinking about what can we do there, whether it's bulletproof glass, whether it's, having more remote days. Like when an event like this happens, I think that it's wise for people to work from home for a week till things die down a bit.
Yeah.
So we just are like constantly reevaluating our own policies as a team to make sure that we feel more comfortable. But I mean, I will tell you also, quite frankly, like when something like this happens, my like people's families get very worried naturally. Like my own parents have been calling and texting me, just be careful, don't say too much. So like they feel like the more you say, the more you're putting yourself at risk.
Right. Which I think is the crux of the issue, is that people should be able to speak, and especially it's your job. It's your job to speak on the issues, and even, people who are influencers who, they chose to have a platform and they chose to do it. Just because they chose to do something doesn't mean that they should have to fear for their lives while they're doing it. And so I think that that's something that, and I think we as journalists kind of get a little concerned too, because a lot of times when political violence like this happens, people will turn and lash out at the media, saying it's the media's fault. And I think there's validity in that from both sides. I think both media, like both sides of the extreme media, could tone it down a little bit coming from a media person. But I think like it is so upsetting to think that like people's parents have to say, hey, don't talk too much because you can
And
be
that's
in
what
the
I have to
crosshairs.
tell them. I'm like, it's actually like literally my job to
Yeah.
speak on the issues. But yeah, it definitely, and this is the kind of thing that's going to discourage people from wanting to run for office or wanting to be vocal, because why would you literally risk your life, to do so? So there's so many intended and unintended consequences, and makes it, to go back to where we started, I think makes it very, very important that we think, all of us collectively think about what we can do to move into a more peaceful era.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation.
And welcome to our Q&A section, where we're going to be answering questions that we get from viewers and listeners. And this one's a particular favorite that I'm quite excited to answer. So this is from Callie, and she says, what should you learn in your 5th grade government class?
A lot.
What shouldn't you learn in your 5th grade government class? 5th grade teachers, watch this clip, because I feel like we'll give you a lot of tips, especially coming from people who are in the Capitol every day. My gosh, where to start?
I mean, where to start? Whenever I started my government class, my senior year of high school, I knew nothing.
No.
I did not know term limits. I did not know the difference between the House and the Senate. I didn't realize
Or the White House.
That the White House has different term limits than the Senate. The Senate has different term limits than the House. I didn't realize there was 100 senators and 435 House members.
Yeah.
And I think that if you ask people now that are our age at home, I think that a lot of my friends would say that Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, is a senator.
Right.
Or that Ted Cruz is the governor of Texas.
And for me in Illinois, they'd be like, J.B. Pritzker is not a House member?
Yeah.
I'll be like, no, he's the governor. And I think it's funny because in 5th grade, I think is when you start to be learning about what the Capitol is, what a bill is.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, looking back, the biggest impact on my life was, shameless plug, Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
Play that for all of your people. In fact, I loved it so much, I dressed up as a bill.
Me too.
I love the bills. I think it's so funny. It talks exactly about Congress, about how bills are passed, and like, who doesn't love an animated bill with big eyes? Like, it's cute.
I think that dressing up as a bill and going on Capitol Hill is just like something you have to do whenever you're in DC.
It's a DC
I think
thing.
That,
You
I think
have
that
to.
majority of us have done it
We've
at some
done it.
point.
And if you haven't yet, do it.
Because we're all nerds here.
We're
like,
nerds.
let's be for real.
But I think for 5th graders, especially when you are learning about what's going on, you should learn how the separation of powers works. I mean, you have the White House that is under a completely different article or section of the Constitution, which governs the land, than the House and the Senate. The House and the Senate operate on very different rules. You have to learn that the House members are reelected every 2 terms. Senators are reelected every 6. President is every 4. And so I think that keeping all those numbers, it seems like tedious stuff, but then when you get older and you're voting and you're learning how to exercise your right to pick the person you want to represent you, you need to know, okay, I'm voting for this guy and he's going to be a senator for 6 years. I'm voting for this gal and she's going to be a House member for 2. I think it's really important that I think starting as young as you can is important.
And I mean, even how different the House and the Senate are. Senators are elected statewide, whereas House members are elected by congressional districts, which are drawn by population of the states. And so you have places like Texas and California who have huge delegations in Congress and the House comparatively to only 2 senators. So those 2 senators have a lot of power comparatively to like the 30 to 45 House members that come from there. But then you look at places like Delaware that has 1 House member and 2 senators, and that House member is elected also statewide. So it's kind of fun to look at the different size states and like how much power members have in that state, and if they're statewide elected, if they're locally, not necessarily like locally elected, but district elected. And I think that most people don't realize that's why you know your senator's name more likely than not than you do your House of Representatives name.
I'm not ashamed to say that I knew the senators of Illinois when I was a child and even in high school and college before I even really knew who my member, like my representative was.
Totally.
And so I think that that's something that teaching kids at a young age how to not only recognize who their members are, but let them know that even as children and as young adults, you too can have a voice in politics. And so for any teachers who are watching, we have an idea for you for your classroom. We think that you should have kids try to pass a bill.
For something that is like fun for them, like 5 minutes on recess.
Or you can only draw with purple crayons, or things like that. Just do something that is fun. And the best way to do it is pick a group of kids, have them have a bill and have them come up with it together. Let them know what it's like to work with other people, because that's a big thing about Congress that people don't really know either, is that you don't do it by yourself. Not only is it members talking, but one member is talking to a ton of their staff. And so having kids and having young adults work together to craft one sheet of paper is a big feat, and people should feel proud of that. And then have them go and, what we like to say, lobby the bill, whip the bill, which is just fun DC talk for talking to people, asking them to sign the bill, persuading them.
It's like being a salesman.
It's being a salesman. Like, do you want extra recess time? Do you want to be on the swings longer? Yes. Or it's, do you want to learn about or watch a movie in class? Yes. Like, I think it's just a great way to get kids civically involved and to let them know that you too can be a part of the system. You don't have to live in DC to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that it's a great example to show people that, like you said, they have a voice. Like, people in high school in their districts, like, even if you can't vote, like, you can still technically, what we call here, lobby. You can call your member of Congress. Anyone can call their member of Congress.
Absolutely.
Their staff up here takes the call, and whatever concern you air that you want your member to care about, it is logged. And so, like, they keep logs of every call they get, what those calls say. And so I think that it just teaches a really good lesson on how to stay engaged in what's happening around you, starting from a young age. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching Capitol Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And make sure to like and subscribe this video. Keep listening, keep watching, keep sending us those questions. Please. If you want to know about your 4th grade classroom, what they should do in government class, if you want to know what we wear every day on the Hill, we would love to know. And please always make sure to keep reading at washingtonexaminer.com.